Welcome to the Chelsea Blueprint. David and Jacob join me, the organisers of the upcoming protest against Manchester United this weekend. Well, ahead of the game against Manchester United and against Chelsea's BlueCo ownership, because these are two people who have done some incredible work in organising this protest, which is set to be one of really a massive moment in Chelsea's history, this protest, with fans from Strasbourg also coming over ahead of the game against Manchester United. We're going to get their thoughts on it and their feelings around what is going on at Chelsea right now. So I guess a good place to start is yesterday's 3-0 defeat. Well, yesterday as we're recording this, 3-0 defeat to Manchester City, which I'd imagine summarised pretty perfectly how you guys feel about the club at the moment.
Yeah, I think it was expected. Yeah, I think we expected it. I don't go into games at the moment with much optimism. I support the team and want to see them do well on the pitch, but I think it's quite clear that the environment that they've been given to work within isn't necessarily the best environment they could be afforded to display their talents. I think it's unquestionable there is some talent in the squad, right? But realising that talent's a different thing, and I think you have to create an environment for the players to be able to do so. And I don't think the club have done well in that respect. I think we can talk at length about how the club operate, but it was men against boys yesterday. I think it was quite ironic that Mark Gahey scored a lovely goal at the Bridge and celebrated like it meant something big to him. That was a quick bit of a slap in the face. And can you imagine what Mark Gahey or Semenyo would probably have done to our team in January if the club would be prepared to put their hand in their pocket and pay people comparative salaries rather than try and bring young people, young talent in and lowball them and hope that they stay and grow experience, as the club like to throw out there. So yeah, it was men against boys, 3-0. It probably could have been 4 or 5. I think we started off the game fairly okay, but how much was that down to City? Maybe a little bit slow out the blocks. I think there's a lot of players there that aren't necessarily buying into the manager's philosophy. I don't necessarily believe he brings much to the table. I think the fan base is quite unanimous in that he's not going to be the right man for Chelsea. The club will push out their media briefs to people like yourself, Lloyd, maybe, and to other journalists that they want to build with him. And when you're trying to compare yourself to Klopp and Pep Guardiola after you've just come from Hull and Strasbourg, or alluding to the fact that you need time and deserve that time at a club like Chelsea, I think is it speaks to the level of arrogance sometimes that comes from the club. Like, he is managing one of the top 5-6 teams in the world, and he has no real pedigree. I can imagine he walks into that dressing room and a lot of those players have got more experience in the Premier League than he's probably ever had at the top level, let alone as a manager. And he's says he hasn't tried to change too much. In my opinion, he has, and it's not worked. And I don't necessarily think he's got the buy-in from players or fans. His friends, Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart, I know they work closely with him at Hull and and at Brighton, and probably giving him an opportunity. I don't think he's going to last very long, and it's a shame. He does seem like a nice bloke, but in reality, he's not the guy to take Chelsea forward, is he?
So, David, kind of coming on to, I guess, the protest itself ahead of the game against Manchester United, what is it for you that you feel really needs changing at the top of Chelsea Football Club?
I think we are at a point now where we do not have any faith that this current ownership are the right people to take the club forward. When we first set up as a protest group around the turn of the year, just a few days before Enzo Maresca left the club, I think there was a feeling that we felt that with enough media pressure, we could perhaps put enough spotlight on the project itself and maybe look at a change to the model, based on our communications with the club since, and based on our communications with people with probably better understanding of finances than we have. It doesn't look like a realistic possibility. So at this point, what we really need to do is kind of beat the club at their own game, as in utilising the media to try and shine a spotlight on what it is that they're doing and the fact this is not going well, because I personally believe that most of what they put out about the project and the grand plan is about creating a facade that this is all part of something and that eventually it's all going to come together, whereas anybody who actually knows anything about football looks at what we've seen in front of us for the last 4 years and sees this is clearly never going to lead to anything like winning a league title ever. It's just not. So we now need to send a message with Strasbourg fans, who I must say have been fantastic in our dealings with them, really determined to try and make a difference. The fact that they're flying over here, I think, is incredible. And on Saturday, starting at the Wolfpack at 6:30, when we do our march towards the ground for about 15 minutes, we just really want to send the message that this is not acceptable. This is a big club. It's not a trading house, and something needs to change.
I think one of the big things for me is, obviously, as a journalist, so I'm also a Chelsea fan, and I've felt as though, even if you're not a Chelsea fan, I went to Strasbourg I think around the start of last year, and I spoke to some of the Strasbourg ultras and the leaders of their kind of fan groups, and the thing that I kind of felt overwhelmed by was, this isn't just sad for Chelsea or for Strasbourg or for their respective supporters. This is actually really sad for football on the whole. Multi-club ownership and the way in which the ownership are going about what's happening at Chelsea and at Strasbourg is actually detrimental to football as a project rather than just those two clubs.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a real danger in allowing this model to catch on across football, right? I don't think like, fans are at the heart of everything that, you know, of football, right? Without fans and without the emotional connection that we bring week in, week out, day in, day out to your club, then, you know, there is no football. And as much as they keep on trying to, you know, paint a light of, you know, this is going to be for the best of both clubs, I think it's quite evident it's not. And we feel that our clubs have completely been eroded of their principles and values, and it isn't a club that represents us as fans at all anymore. And I think Strasbourg feel exactly the same as we feel in that respect, and we're passionate about it, and we can't sit back and allow this to continue happening. You know, there's an air of arrogance to what they're trying to implement and do, and, you know, they know best. But multi-club ownership has no place in football. Private equity majority shareholdings have no place in football. You know, I think it's important that, you know, fans across the country, across Europe, really do pay attention to, you know, the ownership structures of their clubs, and, you know, are vocal about what they believe is right and what they believe isn't, because otherwise you'll see what happens to Chelsea and Strasbourg. The complete identity will continue to be stripped of the clubs, and, you know, fans are secondary to them. We are just a byproduct of what they want to try and achieve. We feed into it, but in reality I don't necessarily think they care whatsoever about the Chelsea or Strasbourg fans.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to kind of speak about with regards to the weekend's protests in particular. One of which, obviously, Chelsea and protests in the past 2 years. You kind of had the Super League protest that was revered, absolutely brilliant in terms of the turnout and the numbers, and that was kind of backed by not just Chelsea fans, but that felt as though it was backed by football as a whole in the sense of football fans from across the world were against that motion being kind of put into place. Then you had the protests ahead of the Brentford game. That wasn't so revered in terms of its turnout and how that kind of played out. How confident are you? Because I personally feel, as a fan, and from other fans and sections of the fan base that I've spoken to, that this protest at the weekend is going to be more reminiscent or more impactful than the ones we've seen in the past? It feels as though it could be a really big moment in the history of Chelsea.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd say on the protest before the Brentford game, I think for us it was a good way for us to work out how to structure these things going forward. I think because we did a lot of media building up to that protest, and I think maybe what we learned from that was maybe how to structure things better on the day in terms of having someone lead chants and lead where to stand and how the aesthetics of it all kind of look. What we would say though is that going back to the point about media coverage, that was what was very important to us, like particularly the fact that it was mentioned in commentary on Match of the Day and all the Tier 1 media that covered it, such as yourselves. But then obviously we had the club reaching out to the group and everything that came from that. So there's no doubt for us that it's been part of something that's been a good thing for us, but it's about taking it on to the next level on Saturday. All I can think is that the longer that this goes on, the more people will be inclined to join a protest movement. I think we're approaching a point now where either you're on one side or the other, because I actually think it's getting to the serious point of, if you do oppose protests, I get that protesting is not for everybody and that's not everybody's style and the way they want to go about things, but I think if you literally oppose what we're doing, then you enable what Clearlake are doing and ripping the soul out of the club, and BlueCo ripping the soul out of the club, I should say. So this is an important moment. I think the image of us standing alongside Strasbourg will be powerful, regardless of the overall number that are behind us. But the more and more people we can get, the better, because the more and more will make a strong message and give a strong impact.
And just, I guess, to finish, is do you have any kind of message to Chelsea fans who are maybe not yet on board with the idea of protesting? And I guess how important is it, and I want you to speak from your heart as Chelsea fans and how important this is to you, but how important is it that fans are on board with what you're doing?
I'll take it. I think it is massively important. I think it's an opportunity for us to come together, and I think David's right. You know, we have learnt from the last protest. David and I aren't we're not guys that are regularly out there on the picket line somewhere, right? You know, it was something that we got involved in accidentally, and, you know, because we are passionate fans. You know, I want my children to feel the same way about my football club as I did growing up. It was everything to me. Football was everything to me, and it still is. These last 4 years have been really challenging from like a football perspective. You know, I should probably learn to detach the emotion out of it, but it's very difficult when you've grown up for over 30 years loving a football club and going to the stadium and it having such nostalgic feelings. Like, I don't believe under this ownership, if we continue with this ownership, that we will have a football club that is representative of that. And, you know, I'm not necessarily telling everyone just to, you know, this is our view and it's the right view. Like, we believe that, you know, these aren't the right people for the club. We want to do something about it. I think it's evident with what we've seen over the last 4 years, and in particular more recently with the continuous churn of managers. You know, the point blank lying to the fans continuously, trying to control narratives, trying to, you know, spin their way of thinking, and no reality to it. I think it's obvious that it is not working and that they do not have the best intentions of our football club. Look at the financial reports that have come out in the last 24 hours, right? £1.7 billion of cumulative losses at the 22 holdco level. You know, a lot of the journalists will report on the Chelsea level, but actually we need to look at the holdco. This is not a sustainable model. What is their play? You know, because the value of the club that they would need to sell it at to make a return is so significant that it's not possible right now. So, like, you know, what are you doing to the football club? How are you plunging us into this amount of, you know, debt, and, you know, jeopardising the future of the football club moving forward? It's really sad. Like, and we need to push for them to leave the club, and we need to continue as a fan group to fight for what we believe in. And, you know, I believe that BlueCo leaving the club is the right thing for everyone, and the football team on the pitch as well. But David, I'll let you add to that as well.
David, sorry to interrupt, but just to finish on this, I feel like I'm 24. I'm a Chelsea fan. I've always supported Chelsea, and one thing I particularly don't like is the kind of rebranding of what Chelsea Football Club is, this kind of movement towards CFC London as opposed to Chelsea FC. Could you just talk to me a bit about that?
Yeah, well, funny that I actually saw someone with a CFC LDN bag in a Starbucks the other day, and fought the urge to rip it off them and throw it in the nearest bin I could find. I think that's completely symptomatic of the issue that we've got. Because I mean, like going back to like the Super League protest a few years ago, I felt like personally I couldn't not go to something like that. And I feel that way now. And just to follow up on what Jacob said before, do you want to look back at this era and say that you didn't do anything to prevent things like that and the CFC-LDN and the stripping of our identity? I certainly can't sit by idly and do nothing. And I know fans feel like there's only so much we can do. We're just supporters. We're not billionaires. We don't have influence. But look, there's enough examples of protesting leading to something like Super League, like what Man United have had with the Glazers, like what Arsenal had with Stan Kroenke, and things have got better since his son took over. Nottingham Forest with their previous owner, they're now in a European quarter-final. Things can change. You have a voice. You can do something.